"You're the girl they sent for the ledgers," said the man behind the station desk, not as a question but as a verdict. He had not looked up. "We don't have room for a girl in this operation." Clara Sutherland set her traveling case down on the plank floor with a deliberate thud, adjusted the strap of her document satchel, and looked at Barnabas Forded's thinning hair and squared shoulders with the particular patience of a woman who had heard that sentence in various forms for the last 2 years and had stopped letting it cost her anything. "Then you should have wired back and said so," she said. "You didn't. So here I am. Where are the books?" If you have ever had to walk into a room that wasn't expecting you and hold your ground anyway, if you have ever been underestimated by someone who hadn't bothered to read past your name, this story is for you. Stay with it all the way through. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Dusty Roads. We'll be here when you need us. The freight relay depot at Stone Pass Junction sat at the base of a granite cut in the Rockies so steep that in October the sun cleared the eastern ridge for maybe 4 hours before dropping behind the western one. Clara had arrived by supply wagon from the CPR stop 12 miles south, and the cold coming down off the pass had a purpose to it, the kind that arrived in September and didn't leave until June. She had been traveling for 3 days. Before that, she had spent 6 weeks in Calgary trying to find work that used her actual skills and paid her actual wages, and before that, she had spent 8 months watching a lawyer named Prescott Haynes dismantle her father's freight forwarding business. Through a series of documents her father had not understood he was signing, she knew precisely what that looked like now. She recognized the shape of it. She had lived inside its aftermath. The depot was a working operation, a stone relay building, a crew bunkhouse, a cargo shed the size of a small barn, and a series of loading platforms connecting to a spur line that fed freight to and from the main CPR corridor. The Carver Transit Trust, which managed the depot under a Dominion concession, employed 14 men, and as of 3 days ago, 1 woman hired to manage the relay accounts and freight billing records. The records, Clara gathered from the 1-page brief she'd been sent, were somewhat in need of attention. The previous person who had managed them had left in August. The brief did not say why. Ford showed her to the records room with the air of a man escorting someone to a corner he intended to forget about. The room was a converted storage space at the back of the main building. 2 windows, both grimy, a table, 3 shelves of ledger books, cargo manifests, and freight invoices sorted by nobody in particular into no particular system. A tin cup on top of a Dominion Railways commission filing that had left a rust ring on the cover page. Clara picked up the filing. It was a rate certification for the current transit season, listing approved freight fees per hundredweight. She set it aside, removed her coat, and sat down. The first thing she noticed was that the numbers were there. The columns added up. Everything looked, from a distance, like a functioning set of accounts. It was only when you got closer, when you compared the filed rate certifications against the actual invoices, against the cargo weight manifests, against the payout records for the crews, that the shape of the thing began to change. Weights recorded on the manifests that were higher than the corresponding cargo receipts. Freight fees billed to shippers at the certified rate, but costs recorded internally at a lower figure, with the difference going to a transit holding account she couldn't identify by name. Small adjustments, consistent. Nothing dramatic enough to read as error. She had seen this before. She had seen it in her father's books after Haynes was done with them. She worked until the lamp burned low and the sounds of the bunkhouse went quiet. Then she locked the room and went to bed and lay awake for an hour, thinking about how many months this had been running and how many men on the payroll were being quietly shorted on their loading bonuses, while someone collected the difference into an account that had no named owner. In the morning, she went back to the records before breakfast. She was copying figures into her own notebook when she heard the sound that had been in the background since she arrived, a steady, rhythmic clang from the cargo platform. Metal on metal, unhurried, the particular sound of someone who was not performing effort but simply performing work, which is a different thing. She looked out the window. A man was alone on the platform replacing a section of damaged cargo railing, working with the focused economy of someone who had done this kind of task enough times that his body did it while his mind was somewhere else. He was built for the work, not heavy, but solid in the way that came from years of it rather than any particular intention. Worn coat, worn gloves. A face that had spent considerable time outdoors in Rocky Mountain weather and had arrived somewhere past caring what the wind thought of it. He looked up at some point while she was watching, which she had not expected. His eyes were gray-green and still, and he held her gaze for exactly 1 moment before returning to the railing without expression. She went back to the accounts. His name was Murdoch, one of the cargo handlers told her at supper. He had been here longer than anyone. He worked whatever needed working, lived in the small cabin at the north end of the depot property, and mostly kept to himself. He was at the end of the table that evening, eating with the same quality of attention he gave the cargo railing, complete, unhurried, focused. And when their eyes met briefly across the room, he didn't look away first and didn't look away second either. Just acknowledged her presence the way a person acknowledged something that had arrived and was worth taking note of, and then returned to his supper. Clara returned to her ledgers. She worked 3 evenings before she found the document that changed everything. It was folded into a cargo transit file from 14 months ago, a fee redistribution authorization, signed under the Carver Trust letterhead, directing that a seasonal freight revenue adjustment be applied to a secondary holding account registered as Ford Logistics Holdings. The amount redirected was listed as a percentage. Over 14 months at the volume this depot processed, that percentage represented somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000. Clara read it twice. Then she reread the signature block at the bottom of the authorization. It was not Ford's name. It was a name she didn't recognize. M.D. Carver, operating trustee. She was still holding the document when she heard boots in the hallway. She looked up. Murdoch was in the doorway. Not leaning, not casual, just present in the way of a man who had stopped and intended to stay stopped. Late to still be working, he said. The mess is larger than the brief suggested. He looked at the open ledgers on the table. His eyes moved across them with the kind of recognition that didn't come from casual glancing. How long have you been comparing the manifests against the billing records? Since yesterday. And what have you found? She looked at him for a moment. What do you already know? He was quiet. The lamp threw long shadows. Outside, the pass wind moved through the cable lines with the particular low note it made when the temperature had dropped below freezing. Don't work in here alone after dark, he said finally. Lock the room when you leave. Then he was gone. She sat for a long time after his footsteps faded. It was not a threat. She had encountered threats in sufficient variety to know the difference between warning and menace, and what she had just heard was warning. The kind offered by someone who knew something they could not yet say plainly. She locked the room and went to bed. She did not sleep well. The following morning she found him at the cargo scales, recalibrating the weights after a shipment had knocked one of the counterbalances askew. She stopped beside him. I need to ask you something directly. He set down the weight he was holding. All right. The holding account in the redistribution authorization. Ford Logistics Holdings. Do you know it? Something went very still in him, not the stillness of a man trying to remember, the other kind. Where did you see that name? In the fee authorization documents from 14 months ago. She held his gaze. Murdoch, the certification rate and the actual billed rate don't match. The difference has been going somewhere for over a year. I need to know if you understand what I'm looking at because I think you do. He picked up the counterbalance weight again and turned it in his hands without looking at it. The weight records, he said. Are they part of it? Yes. The manifests overstate the cargo weights by a consistent percentage. The shipper is billed at the certified rate on the inflated weight. The actual operating cost is recorded at the real weight. The margin goes to the holding account. How long has it been running? At minimum 14 months, possibly longer. The records before that point are missing, or removed. He looked at her then. Gray-green eyes in the morning cold, with the particular expression of a man who has been carrying something at considerable effort and has just arrived at a decision about what to do next. You'd better come to my cabin this evening, he said, after supper. She did. The cabin was small and entirely purposeful. A table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a shelf of books that surprised her, law, a well-used copy of the Dominion Railway Act. She sat down across from him without ceremony. Tell me who you actually are, she said. He placed a document on the table between them. It was a letter from the Dominion Department of Railways and Canals in Ottawa, addressed to Murdoch David Carver, Carver Transit Trust, Stonepass Junction, Northwest Territories. Clara read his name twice, then she looked up. "Carver," she said. "Yes." "This is your operation." "Yes." She looked at the room around her, the worn coat on the hook, the shelf of law books, the single lamp. "You own the entire transit concession, and you've been here working as a cargo handler." "I've been doing what I always did," he said, "what my father did. The way you actually understand an operation is from the inside of it, not from a management office in Calgary." She looked at him steadily. "When did you know something was wrong?" "When I came back from Ottawa 14 months ago after renewing the Dominion concession. I had been away for 6 weeks. When I reviewed the revenue summaries for that quarter, the figures were consistent with projections, but the internal cost records didn't match. The discrepancy was small enough that a person not paying close attention would have filed it as a rounding variance." He paused. "I pay close attention." "But you didn't stop it." "Not immediately." His jaw tightened slightly. "Because Ford has a business partner in the Calgary Dominion Land Registry Office. If I had moved openly, he would have had the transit concession documentation tied up in a procedural challenge for 2 years, during which time the depot would have had to suspend operations and 14 families would have lost their income." He looked at the wood stove. "I needed documented evidence sufficient to take to the commission in a single filing, not a dispute, a case." Clara felt the shape of this settling over her. "So you arranged for someone with proper accounting training to be hired?" "Through the Trust's administrative office, yes." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew who I was before you hired me." "I knew your father held a freight forwarding concession in Calgary until 1891. I knew his business was taken through a falsified liability restructuring. I knew that you had managed his accounts for 4 years and that you would recognize what a manipulated ledger looks like, not as a technical exercise, but as something with real consequences." He met her eyes. "I needed someone who would understand what this costs, not in dollar figures." Clara looked at her hands flat on the table. She thought about the morning she had sat in her father's office, after Haynes's lawyers had finished, looking at documents that were perfectly legal and completely wrong, understanding for the first time that paperwork could be a weapon wielded by people who knew how to hold it. "You had no right to recruit me without telling me what I was being recruited for," she said. "No, I didn't. You made me part of something without giving me the information to choose it freely." "Yes, that was wrong, I'm telling you now." The fire in the wood stove was burning low. Outside, the pass wind had picked up, moving through the pines with a sound that had nothing in it of comfort and everything in it of altitude and distance. "What do you need from me?" she said. Something in him shifted, not relief, but the posture of a man who has been holding a considerable weight and has just been offered the chance to set it down properly rather than drop it. "Everything in those records," he said, "cross-referenced, documented, irrefutable." "How long do we have?" "Ford travels to Calgary on the 1st of November. That's 17 days. If he reaches his contact at the registry office before we file with the commission, the holding account documentation disappears and we're left with discrepancies that his lawyers will call clerical error." 17 days. "There's something else," Clara said. She placed the fee redistribution authorization on the table and pointed to the signature block. "M.D. Carver, that's your signature." He didn't move. "Ford has a document with your name authorizing the original diversion to his holding account," she said. "He'll use it to claim you knew, that the entire operation had ownership approval from the beginning." "Yes," his voice was flat. "That's his insurance." "You signed it without understanding what you were signing." "I was presented it as a seasonal rate adjustment filing, routine administrative matter, the kind of document I had authorized my operations manager to process on trust behalf." He used that standing authorization to misrepresent a fraudulent diversion as routine maintenance of accounts. He looked at the document. "I understood what I had signed approximately 6 weeks later, when the holding account appeared in the quarterly summary." Clara stared at the authorization. She turned it over. She thought about the document sequence she would need to build, about where this piece fit in it and what it changed. "There's a way to use it," she said slowly. He looked at her. If the subsequent diversions, all 14 months of them, were executed without any further signature from you, without any additional authorization sought or given, then the pattern itself becomes the evidence. A genuine administrative adjustment requires ongoing documentation, ongoing oversight. Fraud requires that no one ever come back to you again. The fact that Ford never sought another signature after the first one isn't a coincidence. It's the proof that the first signature was obtained through misrepresentation. She met his eyes. I can build that argument into the document structure. It has to be built carefully. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was not quite relief and not quite gratitude, but something between them, the expression of a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation in an upward direction. Then we start tomorrow, he said. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, Clara was back in the records room. She worked in methodical layers, cataloging first, then indexing, then the careful comparative work of holding two sets of records against each other to find exactly where they diverged and why. She kept the documents she flagged. In the leather document case she had brought from Calgary, the only container in the room she controlled entirely. On the fifth morning, a young cargo handler named Eli Strang appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea and the careful posture of someone who had a reason for being there that wasn't the tea. Cook said you've been missing breakfast, he said. Thank you, Eli. She moved a stack of manifests to make space. He sat down and wrapped both hands around his mug and didn't leave. He was maybe 22, with the sunburned neck and watchful eyes of someone who had been paying attention to things he didn't yet know how to act on. The other men are saying Ford brought you in to make the records look clean before the commission auditor comes through, he said carefully. That you work for him. Clara set her pen down and faced him directly. I work for the Carver Trust, not for Ford. He was quiet. Then what are you actually doing in here? I'm documenting the real financial state of this operation, the actual figures, not the version being presented to the workers on this payroll. She held his gaze. Ely, what does your loading contract specify for the night shift bonus rate? He told her the figure. She turned to the ledger, found his entry, and held it open so he could read the original contracted rate beside the rate actually applied in the payment records. The two figures were not the same. He read it twice. Something moved through his face, the specific expression of a young man encountering the proof of something he had suspected, but had not been able to hold in his hands until now. That's my money, he said quietly. Yes, and I'm building the documentation to prove it. He looked at her for a moment. Does Murdoch know? The question landed with a particular weight, not the content of it, but the certainty with which he asked it. As though Eli Strang, who was 22 and had never been told who actually owned the concession he worked for, already understood on some instinctive level that Murdoch was the axis around which the questions that mattered turned. Yes, Clara said, he knows. Eli nodded slowly, as though something had been confirmed rather than revealed. What do you need from us? He said. Clara felt something shift in her chest, not sentiment, but the specific weight of understanding that she was no longer carrying this alone. Every document you were given when you were hired, she said. Original contracts, payment receipts, anything written about rate adjustments, whatever any of the men have kept. Some of us kept things, Eli said. Didn't know why at the time. Just felt like the kind of thing you didn't throw away. He stood up. I'll talk to the others. He left. She turned back to the ledgers. Outside, the depot was coming to life, the cargo platform busy, the spur line already receiving the morning's first transfer cars. Everything proceeding with the indifferent momentum of a working operation, while beneath the surface of it, something was fracturing, slowly and completely, and without any outward sign. She found Murdoch at the cargo shed that afternoon. He saw her coming and said 2 quiet words to the man he was working with, who moved to the far end of the shed without comment. Eli Strang knows, she said. He's going to collect documents from the other workers. Murdoch set down the chain he'd been threading. I expected that. He's been watching the numbers in his own way for months. How many other men know something is wrong? Most of them. They don't know what to do about it. She looked at him steadily. You've been watching them carry that, knowing they were being shorted for over a year. I've been building the case to stop it permanently. His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it now. Not just fix it once and leave the mechanism intact. Ford doesn't operate alone. He has a partner at the registry and almost certainly contacts at the Commission's Calgary office. If we move before we have an irrefutable paper record, his lawyers convert it into a billing dispute, and everyone on this property ends up with nothing and no employment. And so you watched. And built. She looked at the mountains behind the cargo shed. The eastern ridge was already in shadow, even though it was barely 2 o'clock. I need access to everything the trust holds, she said. Every correspondence with Ford, every amendment to the operating agreement, every transaction record from the beginning of his management appointment. You'll have it tonight. That evening, Murdoch brought a locked document case to the records room and opened it with a key from his coat pocket and said nothing beyond that. Clara worked through its contents until after midnight. What she found reordered everything she had understood about the shape of the fraud. The cargo weight manipulations and the fee diversions were not opportunistic skimming. They were structured. Each adjustment targeted specific high-volume shipper accounts. Each holding account transfer followed a consistent timing pattern, aligned with the CPR's quarterly billing reconciliations. Small enough to fall below the threshold that triggered automatic commission review. Large enough that accumulated over 14 months, they represented a systematic extraction. Ford was not improvising. He had built this before he arrived, and he had built it to last. There was something else. Clara found it in the amendment correspondence from 16 months ago. A letter from Ford to the Trust's Calgary administrative contact, referencing a forthcoming visit from a Dominion Railways inspector and outlining a set of document preparations he described as standard pre-inspection protocols. The letter was CC'd to a name she didn't recognize at the Commission's regional office. She had 2 weeks before Ford left for Calgary. She had just found evidence that he had a contact inside the Commission itself. She went to find Murdoch. His cabin light was on. She knocked. He opened the door already dressed, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. "The Commission contact," she said without preamble. "Ford has someone inside the regional office. There's a CC in the 1891 pre-inspection correspondence." He stepped back to let her in and looked at the letter she was holding. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but the confirmation of a thing he had suspected and had hoped not to find proven. "Which means we can't file with the Regional Commission office," she said. "We need to go directly to Ottawa or to the Inspector General's office in Winnipeg." Winnipeg. His voice was certain. The Inspector General has jurisdiction over concession fraud. Regional offices don't. How far is Winnipeg? 4 days by rail from the CPR junction. 6 days if the November weather is already moving through the passes. And Calgary, how long would it take Ford to reach his registry contact from here? Murdoch looked at the wall. 2 days. Clara thought about the document case, about what she had and what she still needed. "I need 3 more days in the records. Everything cross-referenced and bound in the right sequence." "You'll have them." She turned to go. "Murdoch." She stopped at the door. "The signature on the original authorization. I want you to understand something about how I'm going to use it." He waited. "I'm placing it last in the document sequence. By the time the Inspector General reaches it, he will have already read 14 months of subsequent transfers executed entirely without your knowledge or authorization. Your signature doesn't open the fraud. It ends the argument about whether you were willing. No one who intended to participate signs once and is never consulted again. The absence of your signature on everything that followed is not a gap in the record. It is the record." She met his eyes. "I'm going to take that document out of Ford's hands before he ever gets the chance to raise it." The stillness that moved through him was different from his usual quiet. It was the stillness of a man who had been carrying something specific and difficult for a very long time, and had just been shown the precise place to set it down. "Thank you," he said, simply, without decoration. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me when it's done." She walked back down through the cold and the dark to the records room, and worked until the sky outside the window went from black to the gray of early mountain morning. It was Eli who warned her. He appeared in the doorway on the 12th morning with the particular look of a young man carrying news he knows changes the calculation. Ford sent a wire to Calgary yesterday afternoon, he said. I saw him at the telegraph office through the window. Clara looked at the document case on the table. Not complete, but close. Who does he wire in Calgary? Don't know, but after he sent it, he went back to the manifest files. He was in there for an hour. The weight logs. The original weight logs from the 1890 season, the ones she hadn't yet fully cross-referenced because she'd been working forward from the most recent records. If those logs went missing, the longitudinal pattern of weight inflation became unprovable. She had already memorized the critical figures, but memorized figures were not notarized originals. She found Murdoch at the platform. She told him in 4 sentences. How fast can we get to the CPR junction, she said. He was already thinking, if we ride tonight, we make the morning southbound. Winnipeg in 4 days if the passes are clear. The original weight logs, where are they stored? Filing room off the station manager's office, Ford's side of the building. She looked at Eli. Can you get into that room tonight, before Ford closes it for the evening? Eli didn't hesitate. Yes. The 1890 weight manifests, dark green binding, stored on the lower shelf. I need the physical originals. She held his gaze. Don't let him see you until after you have them. Eli was moving before she finished. They rode south through the night. The mountain dark was absolute and cold and entirely indifferent, and the horses were good horses, and Murdoch had brought enough for the ride, and had packed efficiently and without theater, which she had come to recognize as simply his manner, assessing what a situation required and addressing it without the need to announce the process. He rode beside her rather than ahead. When the trail narrowed, he dropped back without comment and came forward again when it widened. She noticed. It was a small thing and it mattered anyway. Somewhere in the deep of the night, with the pass peaks black against a sky thick with stars, she told him about her father's freight concession, about the lawyer Haynes and the liability restructuring documents, and the morning she had understood what had been done, about the winter after. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she said. Be useful, which is what we're doing. They made the CPR junction by dawn. The eastbound was leaving at 7. They were on it. The Inspector General's office in Winnipeg was a stone building on Portage Avenue that communicated authority the way buildings built to last communicated it, not loudly, but permanently. The clerk at the desk looked at Clara's road-worn coat and traveling case, and the expression of a woman who had ridden through a Rocky Mountain night and was not performing urgency, but simply radiating it. She asked to see Inspector General Harold Caird. The clerk said he was in conference. Clara said she had documented evidence of systematic freight fraud affecting a Dominion Transit concession, evidence of a commission contact being used to protect the operation, and that the man who had arranged it was currently en route to Calgary to destroy the original records. She said it in exactly those words, quietly, without inflection. The clerk went to get Inspector General Caird. Caird was a compact man in his 60s with the eyes of someone who had spent 30 years determining what was actually true, as opposed to what people believed was true, and he read the document sequence Clara placed before him, with the focused attention of a man who did not need things explained to him, but needed them organized correctly. She had organized them correctly. He asked 6 questions in the first 40 minutes. Precise, technical questions about the holding account structure and the Commission CC correspondence. Clara answered all 6 with specific document references because she had anticipated all 6 during the 4 days on the train east. When she placed Murdoch's original signed authorization on the table last, Caird looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Murdoch, who was sitting against the wall the way he always positioned himself in a room, present, available, not inserting himself unless called upon. You signed this document, Caird said. Under misrepresentation, Murdoch said. I had authorized my operations manager to process routine administrative filings on behalf of the trust. He used that standing authorization to characterize a fraudulent fee diversion as routine accounting maintenance. The evidence that it was misrepresentation rather than authorization is in every subsequent transfer executed without my knowledge or signature. Which is all of them, Caird said. Which is all of them. Caird sat back. He looked at Clara. You structured the argument into the document sequence deliberately. Yes, sir. so that I would reach his signature, already understanding the context in which it was obtained. Yes, sir. He looked at the full set. He was quiet for a moment with the quality of a man organizing his understanding of something whose scope has just become clear to him. Then he said, I'm issuing an interim concession protection order tonight. All Carver Transit Trust account transactions are frozen pending investigation. The Regional Commission Office in Calgary is suspended from involvement in this matter pending review of the contact correspondence. He looked at Murdoch. The Trust's operating authority is confirmed in your name, Mr. Carver, as of this order. Clara let out a breath she had been keeping since the Rocky Mountain night. The NWMP in Calgary located Barnabas Ford at the registry office the following morning, exactly where Murdoch had expected. He was in the middle of a conversation with his registry contact when constables arrived. His lawyer was in the building within the hour. It didn't matter. The documents were already filed. The protection order was already signed. There was nothing left to make disappear. The full adjudication took 4 months. The Inspector General's findings, when they came, were specific and complete. Systematic freight weight manipulation over 18 months, fraudulent fee diversion totaling $42,000, and a criminal obstruction charge arising from Forda's communications with the Commission contact. The registry contact was removed from his position pending his own investigation. Forda's logistics holdings was dissolved. Restitution was ordered for every worker on the Stone Pass Junction payroll whose loading bonuses had been shorted, with interest. Eli Strang was the one who stood up and applauded when Murdoch read the findings to the assembled depot crew in the cargo shed that afternoon. Not the performative kind of applause. The kind that comes from people who have been waiting a long time for something to resolve and are still in the process of understanding that it has. You were here the whole time, Eli said to Murdoch afterward, with the particular tone of someone who is still recalibrating. Working beside us, knowing the whole time. I knew someone was stealing from you, Murdoch said. I was working to stop it in a way that couldn't be undone. Eli thought about that. You ate at the same table as us every night. Yes. You could have just fired Ford and brought in someone else. And left the holding account structure intact and the registry contact in place and no criminal record to prevent him doing it somewhere else. Murdoch held the young man's gaze. Firing someone isn't the same as stopping them. Eli nodded slowly, the way a 22-year-old nods when something lands that he knows he'll still be thinking about in 10 years. It was 2 weeks after the findings, on an evening when the first hard frost of November had moved in off the peaks, and the depot was quiet and the wood stove in the records room was going for the first time that season, that Murdoch knocked on the open door and stepped inside. The room looked different. She had been working in it for 3 months now, and it had become a proper records room. Indexed, organized, functional. The work of making order out of deliberate disorder, which was something she had become very good at. The Inspector General's office sent their final concession confirmation today, he said. The Trust's operating authority is restored without condition. I know, I was copied on the filing. He looked at the room, at the shelves she had organized, at the desk where she sat with the lamp burning and the current season's manifests in front of her. Then he looked at her. Clara, he said. Her name with the particular care of a man who has been thinking about what he wants to say and has arrived at the decision to say it without dressing it up. You're about to say something that requires me to respond to it, she said, and I'd rather you just say it plainly. Something in his expression shifted. Stay, he said. One word. No elaboration. The word of a man who had learned that the honest version of a thing was always smaller than the performed version and always cost more. She looked at the frost on the window. She looked at the lamp. She thought about the morning she had arrived at Stone Pass Junction with a traveling case and a document satchel and a refusal to be dismissed by a man who had not bothered to look up from his desk. She thought about what it meant that she had found this here, in a converted storage room at the base of a Rocky Mountain pass. In the middle of a fraud investigation she had walked into, without knowing she was being recruited, doing work that mattered in the specific and irreplaceable way that work matters when it is the right work. You hired me without telling me what you were hiring me for, she said. Yes, that was wrong. You let me believe things about the situation that weren't fully true. Yes, Also wrong, and I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. He held her gaze steadily, the way he held everything steadily, not because things were easy, but because he had decided that steadiness was the only way he knew how to be honest. I'm asking whether you can see the whole of it, the wrong choices and what was behind them. And the man standing here now who intends, from this point forward, to tell you the complete truth of every matter, because he has found out the hard way that there is only one thing worth protecting with that level of care. The fire in the wood stove held its steady note. Outside, the wind came down off the pass with the particular sound it made in November, cold and clean and enormous. "Ask me again at the end of the season," she said. He looked at her. "Not because I don't know," she said, "because I want to know what this is when there's nothing urgent holding us in the same direction. I want to know who we are in the ordinary." She held his gaze. "I want to know what you're like when you're not solving something." Something moved in his expression that she had not seen there before. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one, quiet and real and not performed for any audience. "That's a fair answer," he said. "It's an honest one, which you told me you wanted." He stood there for a moment longer. Then he said goodnight and walked back out into the November dark, his footsteps steady and unhurried on the plank floor of the hallway. Clara turned back to the manifests. The lamp burned clear and steady. Outside the window, the pass peaks were faint shapes against a sky beginning to fill with stars, and the frost lay clean across the platform boards, and somewhere in the distance the sound of the CPR night freight came down the valley and faded. And she sat in the room she had made orderly from disorder, and did the work that was hers to do. And it was enough, for now, to know that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The woman who had arrived with a traveling case and a refusal had not come here looking for this. She had come here because she needed work that used her actual skills, and because the mountains had been the only direction with an opening, and because she had long ago made her peace with walking toward the uncomfortable thing when the comfortable thing had already cost her everything. She had not come here looking for proof that a person who kept showing up honestly, who refused to be dismissed or diminished or redirected, would eventually arrive somewhere worthy of that refusal. But that was what she had found, here, at the end of a dusty road through the Rockies, in the particular and necessary way of things that are worth finding, not because they are easy, but because they are true.